get so jazzy on the first show. What is up, guys? Welcome to the MLB Strategy Show. Another strategy for you guys, covering another sport which has an ungodly amount of games today across a confusing amount of slates, but we'll talk more about that in a second. I'm Chris Spags, waking up bright and early here on the West Coast to join my good pal and yours. You know him, you love him. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, not quite as early for me, but yeah, it is a difference. The other thing that's funny too is I had just realized right before we started is you had said to me, "Oh, did you get a different camera or something?" I realized that no, there's just better lighting in my room, and you wouldn't know that because we only do shows with each other at night because of the time difference. We're usually not bothering to get you up at 8 a.m. your time, but here we are doing show first thing in the morning.
And normally I'm seeing Greg looking like the troll he is at night, but during the daytime, a raging beauty as always, kind of like that Seinfeld episode of the woman in different lights here. But we're glad to have Greg here. We're glad to have all of you guys here as well. So make sure you smash that like button now. And also, one of the biggest things that you should be doing for yourself when you're on an Awesemo show is making sure to go to awesemo.com/join. Check out all the packages that we have on there for MLB. The starting 9 promo code is going on for a few more days. So make sure to hit that. 9 days of Awesemo plus MLB. All the data, the top stacks tool, player projections, top pitcher tool, ownership projections, lineup builder, a lot of ways to make great lineups for yourself at awesemo.com/join with that promo code starting 9. And we are brought to you guys today by OddsShopper, which is one of the sites that we have that's been created here with a lot of DFS minded, sports betting minded people in mind. The guys who are spending a lot of money, who are looking at player projections for DraftKings and FanDuel and all the other sites out there throughout the day. If you go to OddsShopper, you're going to add a lot of value to your process as well because the prop betting lines on there are going to be really easy to comb through to find the best values, the best win percentages, the best ROI percentages, all of those coming straight from Alex Awesemo Baker's own projections. So make sure you go to oddshopper.awesemo.com. Head on over there where they compile the best bets, game lines, player props, player and team futures, all updated in real time. And if you're ever not able to watch your favorite Awesemo shows on YouTube, make sure to go to the Awesemo Podcast Network at awesemo.com/podcast to check out the latest. And if you leave a 5-star review on one of our podcasts with your Twitter handle or email address, you'll be eligible to win a free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. One winner gets selected every Friday, and any reviews on there are selected to or are able. Oh boy, too early in the morning are available to win. Up for a year. So go to awesemo.com/podcast. And eventually I'll be able to speak and sound better on podcasts when my brain functions normally. But Greg, we got the slate today, and let's talk really quickly about the early game situation because I just want to make sure we set the bar appropriately because people may be hearing this, may be thinking we're going to be doing like an early slate live before lock, but kind of trying to make it a more focus on the main slate here because it's honestly very confusing to circle through which games are on DraftKings, which games are on FanDuel, the different timings and all of that. So Greg, I'll let you take the brunt of all the heat from everybody who wants to hear about the early games. So why we're not doing them today.
Yeah. So executive decision kind of made by me, but also talk with other people about it. And by the way, if people have questions about whatever early slate or whatever, like which pitchers we prefer, like go ahead, shoot those in. But it is really hard to talk about just all of the baseball slates is all encompassing because if you go on the FanDuel app right now, they have an all-day slate starting at 1. They have an early-only slate starting at 4, an afternoon slate at 6:35. Main slate at 7:05, and then a late night swap slate 9:38, and then an after hour slate at 10:10. And then if you go on to DraftKings, their first slate starts at 4:05, then they have the main slate at 7:05. So there's just so many different games across the different sites that it becomes, to me at least, really confusing if we talk about like, oh, this pitcher's in a good spot or whatever, but then it's just a totally different situation where you're talking about a guy on FanDuel where it's like a 6-game slate versus DraftKings where it's a 2-game slate or it's multiple smaller slates broken up. So I feel like at least if we just talk about the main slate, it's kind of all encompassing where it's the same players who at least are on both slates. But I think it gets really convoluted if we start talking about all of the games at once. So if people feel differently, obviously the season's just started. For sure, shoot me a message on Twitter, throw something in the YouTube comments, and we could readjust and find a better way to do it. But for now, just to make it as least confusing as possible and to make it so we're talking about all the guys that we actually like for the main slate, and we could try to be clear about what's most important for the day. That's what we're going to do for now, but we could certainly pivot.
Yeah, so definitely let us know at Awesemo_com or at G Ehrenberg DFS and at Chris Spags, especially because we doing the show 3 days a week for you guys moving forward, and we definitely want to make sure to give you guys the best product we can. But just seems like based upon all the guidance that we've received and honestly just the sites themselves scheduling things as they are, they don't want to work together. So we got to make sure we're giving you guys the best content we can for the main slate. And let's get into it here. We got our first game up. The Mets heading into a game with Philadelphia. 4.5 implied runs on the Mets side, going against Matt Moore. And Greg, we were talking about Matt Moore before we came on the show, a guy who didn't pitch a lot in the 2019-2020 season, didn't play at all. And now he is back out there again, facing a Mets team that does have some guys who have had some historically very good splits against left-handed pitching. Moore himself doesn't seem the projection. I think we need an update for him on Awesemo, but I think the expectation here would be that Matt Moore not likely to go that deep. Also, not a guy that's much of a known quantity based upon the last few years. So how are you handling the spot for Matt Moore? And I guess, is he playable at all for you on a DFS site?
No. So I think we also have to look at, okay, so why did he not play in 2020? Why did he barely play in 2019? It's because he's bad, right? There's not something where he's like, oh my God, he's figured out the league. He's broken baseball. He's too good. We can't pitch him. He was, moderately successful in 2019, but he only pitched 10 innings. Then you go all the way back to 2018, the first time he got real action in MLB. He pitched over 100 innings. He had a 6.79 ERA. So the year before that with the Giants in 2017, he had a 5.52 ERA. And also the peripheral numbers were terrible. So if we look at the Mets, they are definitely in one of the best spots on the slate. Like you said, some of our projections still need to be updated on Matt Moore. As of now, at least in our top stacks tool, it looks like the Mets are going a little bit over-owned. However, I think that once we get some numbers updates, I think that's not going to be the case because Matt Moore, who's, like you said, maybe a little tricky to project just because he's been out of the league or not really pitched at all for the last couple of years. Like you said, we've 10-inning sample on him across the last 2 seasons, but he was so bad before then that I have to think this is going to be a pretty strong spot to stack up the Mets.
And it was something that we were also talking about before the show briefly that, Philadelphia's park maybe not getting the recognition as being one of the big power parks out there, but giving up about 1.3 times the home runs of league average. Weirdly, a lot of triples as well, though. Again, one of those stats is not the easiest to pinpoint. But I do think a Mets stack, I agree, the ownership here on the top stacks tool, they do seem to be a bit over-owned as a team with a 7.5% chance of being the top stack on the day and a 10% cumulative ownership expected for them. Again, that's part of the top stacks tool, which is a big key part really of the Awesemo Plus MLB package. So use that promo code starting9 if you want to see the top stacks tool every day. But I think in this spot, if that ownership comes down a little throughout the day, going to the Mets here definitely intrigues me a bit because, Pete Alonso really in particular, I think could be an interesting one-off, though. I'd like to get at least a mini stack of Mets here because I think there is some power to go around for this team. Alonso himself, a 309 ISO against lefties. You also have a really bad Philly bullpen behind them that going over the last year, about a 1.8 whip for them, giving up a 305 batting average, a 4.6% home run rate. Like Matt Moore, even if he is better than we may think for a guy who's not been able to stick in the league and didn't play last year, possibly because he just didn't have any offers out there. I think that the Mets could be really appealing here and could pile on, whether it be against Moore or if Moore just gets a quick hook, pitches 3 innings, and then you see the bullpen, like they could easily blow this game and give up a lot of production to the Mets.
Yeah, and the other thing too is not really all that expensive, particularly on DraftKings. Like Pete Alonso, who also had a little bit of a down year last year, but I'm kind of taking a lot of the results from last season with a little bit of a grain of salt. Obviously have to wait a little bit, but it was a wonky season. It was a smaller sample size than we normally see. And then, there was also all the other circumstances that went into it where, we had COVID issues. A lot of games got canceled. There was a lot of double headers. So still I look at Pete Alonso, who still, if you look at sportsbooks props this year, Alonso is one of the favorites to lead baseball in home runs. I think DraftKings had him at 11-1 or something like that. So still, he's expected to be one of the premier power hitters in baseball, only 4,800 on DraftKings. Francisco Lindor also 4,800. So this is a very reasonably priced stack for what I do expect to likely be one of the better teams with a chance to be the top scoring teams of the day.
Who do you prioritize here? I feel like we're in agreement here. It seems that Alonso would be the one to prioritize. Not crazy about the lefty-lefty matchup for some of the guys that we're probably going to see up top, with Nimmo expected to be in the leadoff spot, Conforto expected to be hitting into 3-hole. But do any other Mets jump out as being meaningfully appealing? I think, Lindor, certainly a guy who got his big payday here, hasn't been the best power hitter against lefties, only a 156 ISO, but we certainly know he can get it done. Does anybody else jump out as being key parts of the Mets that you would want here alongside Alonso?
Yeah, so it's going to be a little bit different on different sites. On FanDuel, JD Davis likely going to be batting somewhere near the top of the order. He's only 2,400 on FanDuel, so that actually makes him, to me, one of the better value plays on FanDuel. On DraftKings, and this is more of a DraftKings specific play, James McCann, who's 3,700. I expect that he's probably been hitting somewhere in the middle of the order. Somebody who's hit left-handed pitching really well in the past. So 3,700 for a catcher when we have to roster a catcher on DraftKings, don't have to roster a catcher on FanDuel. So McCann, more of a DraftKings play, and then JD Davis, a stronger play on FanDuel.
Yeah, getting the catcher correlation there, I think a McCann part of a Mets stack to me does look decently appealing here. And it's worth noting, too, even the lefties in this lineup going against lefties, like I have this lineup today having a 356 on base percentage against lefties. So lots of ways it could get uncomfortable here, even if they don't immediately drive big power for these guys. But if these guys get on base, it wouldn't be shocking to see there be a one outlier game here in terms of just, maybe 2-run, 3-run home runs for at least one or two guys. The Philadelphia side, Greg, I think less appealing. It does seem like going to DeGrom is going to be the much more popular move here, where he is priced reasonably, but he's also got the best projection on the board, I think, out of everybody on any game today. So that's certainly going to give him a cosign. Projected for 61% ownership on DK today for Jacob DeGrom. And I don't find much of an issue with that. I mean, the numbers jump off the page as they always have for DeGrom, where swinging strike rate for him last year was 22%. Going back over the last couple of years, 17% swinging strike rate, 38% chase rate. The K rate for him is at 34%. The one thing I guess that could be some concern is I only have there being two guys above league average in strikeouts for the Philadelphia batting order here, where you do have a lot of guys who can sort of sustain at bats, the Alec Boehms of the world, Didi Gregorius, John Segura, like all these dudes for the most part can't extend at bats. But I don't think for a guy like DeGrom, whose stuff is so overpowering, that would be much of a concern for me, Greg. So how are you feeling about DeGrom here? And is he the chalk play for you today?
Yeah, he's the best play on the slate. And then also for anybody who's listened to my baseball content, read stuff in the past, I generally am paying up for pitchers, and there's nobody else to pay up for on this slate. If you look on FanDuel, we have Jacob DeGrom is 11,000. The next highest priced pitcher is Justice Sheffield at 7,200. So if we get any sort of cheap value plays that open up where it's just somebody who's, hitting in a premier lineup spot that we wouldn't normally already be expecting, and that creates, somebody who want to get into lineups to save value, there's nowhere else to pay up at pitching. So DeGrom at 11,000 on FanDuel, easily the best play. And then on DraftKings, he is 10,700, which also is way cheaper than we normally see from peak DeGrom. Like when DeGrom's really going well, he's somebody who we see priced north of 13,000. So we're getting a little bit of price discount there versus what we normally see. And the most expensive pitcher on DraftKings outside of DeGrom is Trevor Williams at 8,300. So once again, like DeGrom, if you're rostering any cheap hitters, you're just going to be paying up to DeGrom by default. And the other thing also is there's so much variance in baseball. Like at any given time, you could have a hitter who puts up 0 fantasy points. Obviously pitchers could get bombed. That could happen, but it's very rare it happens to somebody like DeGrom. And just being able to get that kind of stability in your MLB DFS lineups, that's going to make DeGrom somebody who, number one, you absolutely have to pay in cash games. If you play MLB cash, he's going to be rostered basically universally. And then even for tournaments, at 61% ownership on DraftKings, I'm going to be above that number because I like the security there. Even if he has a bad game for DeGrom and scores, like 18 or 19 DraftKings points, you're still probably sitting really good because that's a lot more security than any other pitcher on the slate can offer.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, and as Greg mentioned, these guys do sometimes get bombed out, but there are some pitchers who have the kind of troubling stats you could point to where it's like, oh, this guy gives up a good amount of power. Like, I'm trying to think what a good example that would be. But there are some pitchers that you'll see. I feel like Trevor Bauer's kind of been like that historically, where he's got amazing strikeout stuff, but does sometimes struggle giving up, a lot of high ISO or just a high home run rate or a lot of hard contact. DeGrom really doesn't have those signifiers here that would give me too much concern normally, especially against the Philly lineup that also doesn't have a ton of power going its way. So I think I'm with you on the same page here. DeGrom to me does look like the choice pitcher of the day, no matter what site you're playing on. We do have to answer the question though, because I know people always like to try to stack against the highly owned pitcher, and sometimes it does work out, Greg. So is there any world to you where you're going to have a 5-man Philly stack, or I guess, a 4-man on FanDuel where you're trying to get against DeGrom just because you're going to have so much of them that maybe in the 20% of lineups you don't have DeGrom, you're just trying to target him failing?
Not really. I mean, maybe so I play 150 lineups for baseball. I'll probably set the Phillies at 1% just because that's kind of a standard thing I do. But then a lot of times that team doesn't even end up showing up anyway. But no, that's not something I'm going to be doing. There are chalk pitchers I like to target against, but it's usually a high variance pitcher who it's like somebody who, like Carlos Rodon, we'll talk about later. He's somebody with a lot of strikeout upside, is going to be really popular, but also has a pretty decent chance of busting. Jacob deGrom isn't that. Like, if you look at deGrom's numbers from last year, not only has he been, ridiculously hard to score runs against for the last handful of years, but he had one start all of last year where he scored less than 13 DraftKings points. So there just isn't that much upside to targeting deGrom. And even with the high ownership on him, like there's better ways to get contrarian than stacking against deGrom.
Is there anything at all on Philly that you like here, or do you want to move on? Because I honestly don't see a lot that I would love here, even as a one-off. I guess maybe you can sort of talk me into trying to take a Rhys Hoskins, or I guess Bryce too seems fine at his price point. Honestly, both guys very overpriced on DK, where it's not like you're getting a discount here because you're going against deGrom. I think you can maybe force something here, but is there anything at all that you find appealing about Philly, just even if it is a one-off?
No, like you said, I mean, Bryce Harper's 5,400. We just talked about some of those Mets bats. Like Pete Alonso's 4,800. Francisco Lindor on DraftKings is 4,800. So these guys are significantly cheaper than deGrom, and deGrom is significantly cheaper than Bryce Harper, and he is such a difficult matchup against deGrom that easy enough for me to just not really get any Phillies in my player pool.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. So let's keep it going here. And again, guys, smash that like button. We're getting into our flow here. I'm waking up. I'm finally able to say words, which is a big part of doing the show for an hour. So make sure to smash that like button for us here. And of course, subscribe. We got content going on all day long. Got the tip-off show coming up in, I think, 3 hours and change. We got these live before lock shows for MLB, for NBA. So make sure you are, and also a ton of golf content. It's Masters Week. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel, hitting the notification bell. NHL too. Got it. There's so many sports. I feel like I have to literally mention every single sport just to feel like we're covered here on the channel. The next game up, though, we got Tampa Bay and Boston, 4.8 implied runs on both sides. Nick Pivetta versus Michael Wacha here, a star-studded pitching matchup here, Greg. And Nick Pivetta been awful over the last couple seasons, giving up a 266 ISO to lefties, a 226 ISO to righties. So a lot of power to both sides of the plate. Particularly worse versus lefties, though. 6.04 xFIP over the last couple seasons. Last year, too, 5.2 xFIP overall. So that is a bad number for a guy who, for the most part, should be facing a Tampa Bay lineup that strikes out a good amount. 5 guys over league average who strike out in terms of their numbers, rather. But Tampa Bay, I think, kind of an appealing stack. The prices for some of these guys are going to have likely Yoshi Tsugo up top at under 3K on DraftKings. Austin Meadows and Randy Arozarena, you're paying a pretty high price for those guys, but I think they could pay it off here just because Pavetta's so bad that I think a Rays stack to me doesn't look the most unappealing.
Yeah. And then, so something I really like to base a lot of my lineups off of when I'm building my stacks is I like to use our top stacks tool pretty heavily. And if you look at our numbers, we have the Rays with the best odds of being the top scoring team on the slate. They have a 10% chance of being the highest scoring team. It's a little bit flat at the top. We don't have any one team in like a crazy good spot. One thing that is a little bit concerning right now is it does look like they're going a little bit over-owned. So I'm likely to be a little bit lighter on the field on them just as a total stack. But either way, it does look to be a pretty good spot for them, and definitely individual plays that I'd be looking to target in cash games.
So I think, and looking at the top stack, and I guess it's something maybe we could talk about for a few seconds here, because if anybody checks it out, they might be curious here. But to me, I try to view the chances of being a top stack and the chances of being a top value as running in parallel. So to me, I would think that because I have the 11% chance of hitting a top stack and a 10.5% chance of being a top value, I'd be more inclined to get there more, even though they do look like they're going to be a bit over-owned because they're projected for 13% ownership. But I guess, are you viewing it differently here, where because the chances of them being the top stack, that 11% of the time is probably the same 10.5% of the time they're the top value stack. So they're probably not different occurrences. But to me, that just is more of a sign that hey, these guys are pretty, they're affordably priced and they actually have potential to be slate breakers in terms of raw fantasy points. Are you viewing it through the lens of just hey, I don't want to get more than 11% if the field's going to be 13%? Or are you thinking because they can be a top value and a top stack, like I'm viewing it, that maybe they have a little more appeal, even though they would on paper appear to be over leveraged?
All right. So I look at the top stacks tool in accordance with the top pitchers tool. And these are really the two main things I use to build my lineups along with Fantasy Cruncher on our site. And I look at the top value more when there are a bunch of stud pitchers to pay up for. On a slate like this, where we have DeGrom and then it's just a bunch of cheap pitchers, it's less important to me because we're going to have the money to spend anyway. So the value becomes less important. And then I focus more on just the overall odds of being the top scoring team in accordance with whatever the leverage score is. So a team like the Dodgers, we'll talk about later, that's a team that to me looks like it's going way under-owned. I'd be more apt to get to them. Also, the pricing becomes less of an issue just because there's DeGrom to pay up for, and then the second pitcher I'm using is going to be really cheap. So for that reason, on a slate like this, I don't value the top value percentage as much. There are certain slates where, like, let's say there's DeGrom, there's Scherzer, there's Garrett Cole. I'm probably going to mostly be weighing the value percentage then, as opposed to just the overall odds to be the top scoring team. But honestly, like this, where we're probably going to be after rostering a lot of cheap pitching beyond DeGrom anyway, and 10,700, like I said, that's a lot cheaper than we normally get DeGrom for anyway. It's not something that holds all that much importance to me.
Okay. And I think it's a fair way to look at it too. For me, I just kind of view it as like, hey, there's a bigger possibility of getting something good out of the stack. So to me, if I were to get, like 20% of the stack, I wouldn't be opposed, because whether it be, like 20% across a 5-man or a 3-man or even a 2-man, I think that's sort of the way that I view it more. But I think, what Greg's saying certainly has some merits too. So different ways to play here. There are always some wrinkles and some little bits of edge you can carve out for yourself with how you approach things, but just something to keep in mind there and to think about a little bit differently when using that top stacks tool. Who jumps out to you in terms of hitters though? Like if you were to prioritize, let's say, a mini stack of Tampa Bay, and we're going to have a lot of ownership going to Yoshi Tsutsugo up top and Austin Meadows, two guys over 25%, projected owned at DK, value price, Kevin Kiermaier, also going to be pretty highly owned for himself. But I think paying up for Randy Arozarena wouldn't be a move that I hate here. A guy who doesn't strike out a ton, granted, not the biggest sample size, but has had an unbelievable amount of pop in his time in the majors so far. A 319 ISO overall going back to last year. Also going back to last year, 542 ISO against righties, and Pavetta just been very bad versus both sides of the plate, but still giving up a lot of power to right-handed bats. And Rosarena just jumps out to me as being a guy that's very good, but you can also talk me into Brandon Lau. Like, I think the middle of the order for me would probably be the priority, because like Tsutsugo's at a nice price, but if everybody's going to be there, I'd rather take the guys who actually look like they have a better possibility to kind of to actually put up runs and to generate some power. Whereas Tsutsugo, I think, is just kind of the value play people are going to get in their optimizer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few guys on DraftKings that at least are going to come out as being really good values, just running lineups. Tsutsugo at 2,900 being one of them. You mentioned Austin Meadows at 4,000, and also Kevin Kiermaier at 3,000. That's another really cheap play that's pretty easy to plug in DraftKings. So actually, I think a lot of these guys, I'm probably more apt to get them as one-offs in stacks of other teams than actually stacking the Rays themselves, just based on some of the stack ownership, because I think getting those guys as individual plays inside of other lower owned stacks, like I mentioned, the Dodgers going really low owned. I think if you're using a low owned Dodger stack, but then you're throwing in some of the cheap bats like Tsutsugo or Kevin Kiermaier as one-offs, I think that's a good way that you could use some of the chalky hitters, but also have a lineup that's a little bit different. Then on FanDuel, Brandon Lau, only 3,300. I think he's one of the best second base options. And then once again, Tsutsugo, only 2,500 on FanDuel. That also makes him a value play. That's pretty hard to get away from.
Do you have the K rate for Brandon Lau in front of you by any chance against righties?
I do not.
So I have it at 40%, and that doesn't seem possible, but I guess it wouldn't be shocking, given that this Rays lineup does strike out quite a bit. But the numbers here seem, everything else looks right on my sheet, so I think it just must be fairly jarring K numbers for some of the Rays here. But yeah, Brandon Lau, 40% K rate versus righties seems.
I just brought up his FanGraphs page, but yeah, it does seem a little high. Let's see what he did last year. Overall, his K rate was 33% last year. And then overall for the season, let's see.
No, he's at 28.4 versus righties, it looks like. So I must have some sort of data leak here. I'll figure that out.
He was just last year, he was 26.8% against righties and 23.3 against lefties.
Yeah. So I've had 28.4. So I'm wondering if maybe I'm pulling a different sample size, but either way, definitely some strikeouts on the side here going against Waka. Going against Waka. So going against Pavetta, excuse me. I think that in this spot, I still like the power more than I would worry about the strikeout upside, but definitely something to note here with these guys and something for me to note when I address my sheet later on. Anybody, I guess, that else you want to talk about with Tampa Bay? Anybody priority wise? I know catcher always something that can be tough to fill. Zunino has the power to get it done, though. That power has sort of dripped downwards over the last year in a way that I wouldn't want to pay 4,100 for him if he's going to be hitting in the 9 hole as is projected currently. But is there anything else for Tampa Bay hitter wise that seems appealing to you?
Not hitter wise, but as a contrarian pitcher option, we could transition to this. I think Waka makes a little bit of sense. We look at some of our numbers here, especially if his ownership stays this low. So Michael Wacha, who only 7,200 on DraftKings, and also not somebody I think we have to consider on FanDuel, but since we have to roster 2 pitchers on DraftKings and all of them kind of suck outside of DeGrom as options today, I'll look at Wacha, who we have a 13% chance to be a one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate, only projected for 2% ownership. And Walker's numbers, while they were overall pretty poor last year, at a 6.62 ERA, the underlying numbers do imply that he was a little bit unlucky. He had a 5.25 FIP, 4.61 expected ERA. But the thing that stands out to me is that he did strike out 9.79 hitters per 9 innings. Wacha has been good in the past. So if we're looking for a contrarian option, just because his ownership is so low, I think it makes sense to have him if you're playing like 20 lineups, having him in like 1 or 2 of them, just based on the ownership, and that his odds of being optimal are probably a little bit higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that jumps out to me, and this is something that I normally like to track for, being willing to play some of the crappier pitchers out there, some of the guys at least who don't jump out as having big numbers, but maybe have some sort of ability to get strikeouts. And to Greg's point, Wacha did have a 24% K rate last year, which is an improvement over the longer term sample size. But still, for Boston's lineup, I know Boston fans, some of the YouTube chat earlier were saying how they're disappointed with the Red Sox so far. Still only 2 guys who strike out above league average in the lineup versus righties here. And that gives me some degree of concern for them, given that Wacha doesn't have the most overpowering stuff. But I don't know. Boston, I think I'd be more inclined to take Boston's as a stack here. I think they have some decent potential here, though I guess they are going to be a bit overowned. Still 7% chance of being a top stack, 5% chance of being a top value. I guess I might just be more of a believer in some of the good hitters for Boston, guys like JD Martinez, who's been great versus righties over a longer period of time. I don't know. I get what you're saying with Wacha. I just think Boston to me is still a bit undervalued just because the fans themselves are down on them. And I think they're not part of the national consciousness quite as much, where they haven't been coming through much as a top stack, but they have some guys here who hit pretty well. Like you still have JD, you still have Verdugo, you still have Xander Bogaerts, Devers is a good hitter from time to time, at least. I feel like Boston with a 4.8 implied total, I just don't hate the idea of them as a stack.
No, neither do I. It's really just that if you look at Wacha, his ownership is so low and the pitching options are so bad beyond DeGrom that, like, I don't feel that. All right, so here's the chalk SP2 tonight. I'll give out what the ownership we currently have projected for our on DraftKings. Carlos Rodon is projected for 58% ownership on DK. Michael Wacha is projected for 2% ownership. I don't think that Rodon is 30x more likely to end up in the optimal lineup than Michael Wacha. And Carlos Rodon is so popular and a pretty high variance pitcher. He does get a lot of strikeouts and definitely has immense upside. But if he doesn't have a good game against Seattle, somebody else ends up in the optimal lineup, and it's just a crapshoot. Like, all these guys are pretty bad pitchers. So Michael Wacha, just the ownership is so low. Like, I don't think he's significantly different as a pitcher than somebody like Justice Sheffield. I don't think he's significantly different than Carlos Rodon, at least not 30. At least I don't think Carlos Rodon warrants being 30x more owned. So that's really what has me at Wacha. It has nothing to do with what I actually expect him to do. It's just ownership.
Okay, that seems fair. Also, I figured out what got me wrong. So now my number is going to be beautiful and pristine. But I had something wrong here on my Excel that it's going to take probably way too much time to fix. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that, and Steven in the chat too, saying that the Red Sox, nobody's hitting besides JD right now. I think that's been the way the Red Sox have been the last few years. So I certainly get that. And maybe it is just a JD or bust spot, and you are paying premium prices for these guys, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like going against Wacha, never something I mind, given that he does give up a lot of power, especially to righties. At 251 ISO to righties, I think you wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to get any of the Boston righties into your lineup today. Let's keep going through here. We got Milwaukee and the Cubs, 4.6 implied runs for the Brewers side. The Cubs projected for 4.9 implied runs on their side. Trevor Williams versus Brett Anderson, and Trevor Williams kind of shockingly highly priced here going against Milwaukee. The weather at Wrigley today, I guess that's an important one always for any sort of Cubs game. Which way the wind's blowing today? Because it does seem kind of like a high Cubs total here, and that makes you feel like it might be a wind blowing out day.
Let me bring it up really quickly on my phone so I could see.
It is going out 9 miles per hour, it looks like, to left field.
Which isn't that significant relative to Wrigley. Like, it's a slight boost for offenses. I'm just going to see if it changed, because when I was looking at it earlier, it didn't seem like anything super significant. And yeah, same thing, blowing out to like left center, looks like 9 miles per hour. So slight boost to the offense, but nothing that I think warrants some of the ownership we're seeing here, particularly on Milwaukee. So I mean, as I'm looking at how I would build my lineups right now, if nothing was to change, my biggest stand on the slate would just be that I would be pretty significantly underweight to the field on the Milwaukee Brewers as a stack. So we have them as the most popular offense on the slate, nearly 20% projected ownership on FanDuel, but only 9.8% odds to be the top scoring team on the slate. Then looking at the DraftKings side of it, they're projected for 22% ownership. So about double the ownership of any other stack on the slate, yet odds of being the top stack on the slate of only about 10%. So I look at those numbers and I just have to prioritize any other team that has about similar odds of being in the top stack, but are just way lower owned. So like Tampa Bay, we talked about them before. Even them, I think, are going a little bit over owned, but still it's similar odds to be the top scoring team with half the ownership. The Dodgers, they have about the same odds as the Brewers to be the top scoring team on the slate, and they have 10x less ownership than the Brewers. So to me, it's going to be really hard to prioritize the Brewers unless something changes with the ownership, because they're going wildly overowned by our numbers.
Yeah, no, I agree. And they do have a pretty high possibility or probability of getting there. As Greg mentioned, 11% chance being the top stack, 14% chance of being the top value. I would agree, though, that is a lot of ownership going to them. So you're going to be pretty chalky. And I guess the question that I would have, is there any way that seems appealing to you to go to Milwaukee and get less chalky, if that means playing, a little more Lorenzo Cain or Travis Shaw, who has been one of, I guess he did kind of rebound in the pandemic season, but for the most part, not the best play in the world over the last couple seasons. Is there anybody here who, I guess, if you wanted to play Milwaukee, if you were just dead set towards playing Milwaukee, is there any way you see to get different here? I guess taking a 3-man might be the way to get different, because it does seem ownership-wise like a 5-man with Colton Wong, with Yelich, Hira, Jackie Bradley, and Omar Narvaez, at least on DraftKings, is going to be a very popular 5-man grouping.
Yeah. I mean, as individual plays, like Christian Yelich, I think is somebody who I'd be apt to pay up for just in lineups where I have the ability to. And like there are guys that I will use as one-offs, like Narvaez will show up as a one-off. I mentioned Yelich, Lorenzo Cain, just because he's pretty cheap. But in terms of the way that I sort out the stacks I make, like I would be significantly underweight to the field on the Brewers. I probably only have them in 2 or 3% of my stacks right now. So as of right now, like my biggest stand on the slate I would be underweight to the Brewers. And I would just hope that any other team is basically the top scoring team on the slate.
Okay, that's reasonable. And I think there are certainly some ways here where it wouldn't shock me if most of the production came from a Christian Yelich, and he's priced some of these guys that we've talked about that are pretty expensive for the Red Sox, for Tampa Bay. So I think going to Yelich as a one-off to me would be appealing. And I guess that's something that I have a question for you, Greg, too, where would you mind getting a one-off Christian Yelich if you didn't get the whole Brewer stack? And for me on DraftKings, I'm running 5 3s, 5 2s, and then sometimes some 5 1s, depending upon how that all looks. But I never have an issue getting with a Yelich, even though I guess, for me, I just do believe in the star power there, and there's always some money to go around to spend. But are you trying to get away from a guy like Yelich if he's going to be 36% owned? And it's still an event-based sport where if Yelich does fail, then you're going to be different from about 1/3 right away.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be the Brewers player I roster the most, just because I think he makes sense as a pay-up option, but I'm still going to be underweight to the field on him. And part of that is just because as a whole, like I said, I'm going to be much lighter on Brewers stacks. So it looks like at least in the initial builds I did, I have Yelich in about 18% of my lineup. So it's not that he doesn't show up, but still it's about half the exposure the field has.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's reasonable. And I just wanted to make sure that we're getting that out there. Yelich certainly going to be a popular play for good reason, but definitely going to be somebody who has a lot of ownership going his way. I guess with all this in mind, Greg, with the fact that you are going to be a little bit less bullish on the ownership of Milwaukee here, and also, just the fact that they are going to be so highly owned, is there a world that you see yourself getting Trevor Williams at all in the hopes that you can capture him, just kind of nickel and diming his way to a mediocre day? The price point on DK at 8,300, I feel like that's a move I wouldn't mind making if he were in the 6K, 7K range, but 8,300, it still feels like you're kind of forcing it, but it is going to be a way to get leverage on a large portion of the field. So I just got to ask you.
Yeah, so I understand the leverage angle. The problem is that even if the Brewers don't really have a big game, I think the more likely scenario is just because they hit a lot of balls hard at fielders. Because you look at Trevor Williams' numbers, he's not a good DFS pitcher, strikeout numbers over the last 3 years. Last year was higher than normal, but still fairly crappy, striking out less than 8 hitters per 9 innings. And then 2 years before that, 6.98 strikeouts per 9 innings, 6.64 strikeouts per 9 innings. So you consider his price point on DraftKings, and still that's just it's too expensive for me for Trevor Williams when there isn't enough strikeout upside to be able to have a significant upside for GPPs.
Yeah, and not a guy who historically pitches that deep into games either. So I think, you sort of want a guy who can hang in for a while and then just get outs. And it's a dangerous game to play here. But at 8,300, I think you're taking on a bit too much risk with Trevor Williams if you are trying to go that way. The Cubs side, though, we do have some guys here going to project for less ownership than the Milwaukee side, but mostly also look appropriately owned, if not a bit over-owned, according to the top stacks tool. Going against Brett Anderson, a guy who historically doesn't give up a ton of power, just a 150 ISO overall. Lefties in particular does keep them inhibited pretty well as a lefty pitcher, 102 ISO for those guys. I don't really like the Cubs here. I guess the wind blowing out, if it gets a little stronger, maybe that does seem like it could change things, but it is a high run total here, Greg. So I don't know if I'm missing something with the Cubs, but is there anything that jumps out to you meaningfully going against Brett Anderson, who's, again, mediocre, but not a guy who gets knocked around terribly bad?
No, I think individual plays, Wilson Contreras as a catcher option is one of the higher upside catcher plays. Jake Marisnick, who has been hitting a lot higher in the Cubs lineup than I would have expected entering the year. He's been batting, I think he might have hit 6th the other day. He hit 6th the other day. So, I mean, I consider that for Jake Marisnick, if he's going to be batting 6th at a 2,600 price tag against left-handed pitching with potentially a little bit favorable weather, then I think he's one of these stronger value options. As a stack, though, the Cubs not really a team I have a lot of interest in either. 8% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate, but then also right now projecting for double-digit ownership. So definitely a team that's going to be in there, but not as a priority play. Like if I had to stack one side of the game, I would prioritize the Cubs over the Brewers, but neither team is going to be all that important to me.
All right, let's keep moving along here. And quick shout out to Gene B. Kim, who threw in an $11 super chat, 11 super chat. He's all good luck all the time with how much he's been minting money recently, saying you guys are the best. I can't watch the show today because I have to teach. Poor Gene, he has to teach and while winning tens of thousands of dollars a night. He's like the real version of Walter White, Greg. He's making his money the hard-earned way. I guess DFS and meth, not that far off.
No, it's the same thing. I mean, that's how Aaron Paul got started.
That's exactly. You could tell by him. He's definitely got the look of a DFS pro. That's what we always say. Dead handsome. That's what we like our guys to look like. Let's keep going through here. We got Houston and the Angels up next. 4.6 implied runs on Houston's side. On the Angels side, 4.9 implied runs for them. Jose Quintana versus Luis Garcia. On Houston's side, it does seem like the stack looks a little bit under-owned right now, so that would be one thing that gives me some degree of appeal. Quintana, not a guy that I think jumps out as somebody dying to be targeted against, but 10% chance of being a top stack, only 7% ownership. I think that gives me enough reason to be on Houston today, Greg. And I think the park factors too for the Angels always been or at least since they renovated the Angels Park, been a better power park than most people out there realize. I have no issue with playing the Houston stack today. I think Quintana himself also, if his ownership is low, I think could be probably wouldn't play Quintana either way. But Houston, I think, looks fine to me. How are you feeling about the Houston stack here? And I think my priority play out of the stack would be probably a pricey Alex Bregman. But how do you feel any differently here? And do you feel any differently at all about playing Houston today at a decent amount of ownership, but looking under-owned according to the top stacks tool?
Yeah, I really like Houston a lot. And just in general, I've actually targeted Houston a little bit over the last couple of years, just based on the fact that there's so much bias against this team. Like nobody wants to win money rostering the Houston Astros because like how long ago was it now they cheated? It's been like 4 years. People still aren't over it. It's still like the who they played they played their opening series against the A's. Like the A's were playing music that made references to trash cans and like cheating and stuff like that, like different like songs that had like sign verbiage in it. So yeah, like we're 4 years later and people have not gotten over this yet, and it's impacted their ownership. It's impacted their betting odds too. If you look at the odds to win the AL West, the Astros are still plus money. FanGraphs has them projected for nearly an 80% chance to win the division, and they're plus money to win it. If you look at the World Series odds, this is a team that is priced like 25 to 1, 28 to 1 to win the World Series. FanGraphs has them with double-digit odds to win the World Series. This is a team that's going massively overlooked everywhere. And it's a team that I'm on for betting purposes this year. I bet them over 87.5 wins. I hope they continue the streak they're on and go 162-0. They're off to a pretty good start so far. But yeah, still, I think this team's going really under-owned right now. If you look at our top stacks tool, Miles Straw as an individual one-off play on DraftKings at only 2,500, somebody with a lot of speed and stolen base upside. He's an individual one-off that I like. Michael Brantley, if he ends up playing, well, that's still a little bit up in the air. He's injured right now. It's not exactly clear when he's going to be back in the lineup, but he's only 4,300 on DraftKings. If he finds himself in the lineup, that's a really cheap price point for him. But yeah, based on the numbers we have here, I think the Astros are one of the top teams to target.
Yeah, same page here. I think the Astros look solid. And I'm with you. I get that there's some moral questionability with the Astros, and it's fun to make fun of the team who did sort of embarrass themselves and route to winning a World Series. You can't take that away from them, I guess. But still, yeah, I'm with you. I think that playing the Astros, for whatever reason, people not that bullish on them, and or they think they're just going to be appreciably worse with some of the guys they lost, and the fact that they're not cheating. But this lineup today, still, the one that they're going to be putting out there has a 352 on base percentage against lefties, a 232 ISO against lefties. Like, it's a good lineup going out there today. So I agree. Trying to just drill down on your Houston biases and get there seems like a decent move. On the Angels side, going against Garcia, I think the Angels also look decent and a bit underowned. I don't have any issue going against Garcia. Like, I guess you can make a case that he's been passable for the most part, and he's only faced 50 batters. So that certainly could change around over the last season. Going back the last couple seasons, faced a little bit more, but still, to me, nothing with Garcia that jumps out too meaningfully that I'd want to ignore the fact that the Angels look good. And also Garcia, I think, should he be the opener here, or is he getting more run as a starter? I actually don't know that question.
I don't really know exactly what the plan is here, but he's not somebody who I have in my player pool right now.
Yeah, he's only projected for 2 from Awesemo and has historically only pitched about 2.5 innings in a game. So Garcia seems like a guy you probably shouldn't be playing much of, if any, today, based on all the numbers there. But the Angels stack, though, I have no issue with. The Houston bullpen, another one that's not that great. Park factors look good. Mike Trout, certainly you're paying that premium price, but he looks solid. I also don't hate the idea of taking some flyers on Jared Walsh, who's going to be actually pretty chalky, but on DK 3,900 for him. Expect to be hitting in the 2-hole. A guy who's had 324 isolated power against righties. To me, this spot looks pretty good for a lot of different Angels here. And I think for 5-man stacks, for 3-man stacks, they look equally appealing to me. But do you have any sort of reservations about playing the Angels today with the 4.9 implied run total?
No, I think this is another team that they look about appropriately owned, but a team that I'm probably going to be stacking somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% or so. Jared Walsh, one of my favorite one-offs on the slate. He did hit a monster home run to win the game last night, also priced under 4K on DraftKings, so he looks like a good value option. And then on FanDuel, he is priced at 2,200. So that is a ridiculously cheap price tag. So Jared Walsh, one of my favorite one-off plays on both FanDuel and DraftKings. And the A's, once again, based on the numbers we have here, look a little bit under-owned to fairly owned. So team that I'm definitely going to be on.
All right, let's keep it going here. And again, guys, smash that like button here. We're getting our footing here for the strategy show, and make sure you're getting it on podcast form too. This is one of the shows that will be up on the Awesemo Podcast Network. Just go to awesemo.com/podcast. Leave those 5 stars, reviews, and ratings as well on Apple Podcasts with your Twitter handle or your email address, and you'll be entered to win that weekly Awesemo Plus membership that's being given away just for leaving a podcast review. So check that stuff out. Next game up, we got the other LA team, the Dodgers. 4.6 implied runs for them going against Frankie Montas. Oakland on their side, 3.9 implied runs going against Dustin May. And I know, Greg, you mentioned the Dodgers being one of your preferred stacks on the day, and they do currently, according to the top stacks tool, have a 10% chance of being the top stack, but only 2.4% cumulative ownership. So I think that sort of says it all here. But the Dodgers, we know, dangerous power in pretty much every position. It does seem to me like you are paying a premium price here in a park that's not the best. So that's maybe one cause for concern, but I'd have no issue with the Dodgers today, Greg. I feel like maybe, ownership wise, honestly, you go 5-man or 3-man and it's not too crazy on DK. But anything you want to really meaningfully mention here? We know the Dodgers are great. I feel like there's going to be a team that's in play pretty much every day.
Yeah, so they are really expensive. So that is maybe a little bit of an issue, but still I have to look at the top stacks tool and see that, hey, we have this team projected to be right in line as one of the top scoring teams on the slate. Like, there are 4 teams that are very, very tight. The Brewers, the Rays, the Dodgers, and the Astros. All 4 of these teams have about flat odds to be the top scoring team tonight, all around 10%. And yet we have the Dodgers only projected to pick up 2% ownership. And the reason why is because of the pricing. So but the reason that doesn't bother me too much is I think there's going to be cheap enough plug-in options. Like we've talked about, like Setsugo, who I think is really popular as a one-off play, but I don't mind getting to him even at his ownership when I'm plugging him in with all these expensive Dodgers guys who aren't really picking up any ownership. And I think there's other guys, like Kevin Kiermaier, Jake Marisnick, Jared Walsh, other guys that have cheap price tags that we could throw them in. The other thing too is even with DeGrom on the slate, there is no expensive SP2 to roster. So it's going to be, for me at least, my Dodgers lineups as I'm looking at them right now. It's DeGrom, a punted pitcher, and then it's 5 Dodgers, and then just whatever 3 bats fit in with those guys. And I think that's a lineup construction that's very contrarian from the field based on the current ownership projections, but still is a very significant amount of upside. And I'm not costing myself Jacob DeGrom in these lineups. So the Dodgers are the team that I want to have the most ownership to as a stack today.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's a very good argument for that. And I certainly would never have any issue for it. I think we mentioned, the one caveat or the one risk being that it is a tough park. And honestly, Montas, for whatever you may say about him and his love of supplements, I guess, still a guy that does get decent results. But yeah, I'm with you. I just think taking the Dodgers on any slate is paying up to be contrarian, which is something that I think Awesemo has talked about a lot over the years in MLB in particular, probably more than any other sport, that when you pay up to be contrarian, you are paying up for quality bats and you're paying up for them, just going against pitchers that can be beaten up from time to time. So I have no issue going there. The Oakland side I guess Montas at all as a pitcher, do you have any interest in him? I feel like we're kind of brushing by him, but I have to assume you're not going to have much if you like the Dodgers that much.
I'm going to have him in a few lineups just as a hedge because if the Dodgers don't work out, and I'm going to be pretty invested in them tonight, I want to have a few lineups that have Montas in it just so those aren't dead. I mean, if we look at just our numbers for him today, he doesn't look like a bad option, especially when considering how crappy the other options are on the slate. But 13% projected ownership on DraftKings with a 15% chance to be one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate. So I'm going to put him in a handful of lineups, but just as a hedge purpose.
We also got one question on YouTube to hit on real fast, and we're going to have to burn through these last couple games. But DJ Crew asking, what's your average number of hitters on the same team you put in a stack on DK, 2 or 3? I feel like we need to hit on this real fast because there may be some people new to DFS or new to MLB DFS in particular, because I think a lot of newer players from what I've seen in our streams seem to think like stacking means like playing just a couple guys. For the most part, Greg, you're running out 5-man stacks with 3-man stacks and 5-man stacks with 2-man stacks, right? Because that's generally what we're going to say is the optimal here. I think you could still force your way to 4-man stacks, but it seems like, you got to have at least a 4-man as the base, ideally a 5-man.
Yeah, so I generally run 5-man stacks on DraftKings, and then FanDuel I do 4-4 or sometimes 4-3-1, just depends on the slate and how much salary I need to save. So on a slate like this, where I would want to get a lot of DeGrom on FanDuel, I would more prefer to go 4-3-1 just so I get that final option that's probably like a value play that opens up more salary savings to be able to get up to DeGrom. For me on DraftKings, every once in a while, I'll do like 4-3-1 stacks or 4-4, but my most common stack on DraftKings is 5-2-1.
Yeah, and that's really the main thing is here because you're trying to capture that whole stack. Usually there's a lot of correlation things that go in line with that, where every at-bat that's successful creates another at-bat for somebody behind them. And that just means that there's more opportunity for these guys to have an outlier day. So again, Alex has given really good explanations of it in the past that I'm sure are more succinct and better spell it out. But basically, you want to stack up as much as possible. And then there are a lot of times too where people end up mini stacking, but ended up not having as good of a day as if they had 5-man stacked a team, because you end up seeing some outlier efforts that go along with the 3 guys you have in your lineup. And that's sort of why you're generally trying to push more towards 5 when you can, at least with your main stack. Oakland side here going against Dustin May. I think Dustin May not projected to go too deep here, only 3.5 implied point or 3.5 points from Awesemo today. It doesn't seem like Dustin May would be a factor for me much. I guess you could talk me into an Oakland stack, but they do have enough power in the middle of the order here with Olsen, Chapman, Mitch Moreland in there too. Sean Murphy at captain too, I think is not a terrible play, but that's sort of me looking for something here to talk about. I guess the fact they're completely unowned and the fact they do have power guys makes Oakland not entirely avoidable for me as a team today, but not a priority for me by any stretch, Greg. And I'm assuming you're going to be on the same page.
Yeah, we have them with the second lowest odds on the entire slate to be the top scoring team. The only team that's lower is the Phillies. So one of the issues with Dustin May, number one, he's fairly expensive today. Actually, I kind of glanced over that he's actually the second most expensive pitcher on the slate, not Trevor Williams, but they're pretty close. Dustin May didn't work very deep into games last year. Despite how good his stuff is, he kind of generates an alarmingly low amount of swing and misses. So he hasn't been really a high upside DFS pitcher because of the lack of strikeouts in the past. Another thing too, he just doesn't work very deep into games. The Dodgers have a really good bullpen. So once again, I think that's probably going to be the case with Dustin May to start the year. I don't really expect him to go too much deeper than, say, like 5 innings into this game until the Dodgers turn it over to the bullpen. The Dodgers also have a really strong bullpen. So all the more reason also to not like the A's, because even once they get past Dustin May, they're probably not going to be facing favorable matchups.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, so let's just keep going here. We got San Francisco and San Diego in a matchup here on the West Coast. 3.7 implied runs for San Francisco going against Adrian Morejon. As I don't even know if I pronounced that right. Morejon? Is that sounds like I'm calling him a moron. Either way, doesn't seem to me like I would like San Francisco very much on their side. Morejon's honestly been pretty bad in his limited run in the majors, giving up a 294 ISO to lefties, 270 ISO to righties. And I guess there is some power for San Francisco going against lefties, but 3.7 implied run total is not the best. This could be a spot that Morejon kind of finds his depth. So I don't know. It honestly does look really bad for Morejon now that I'm looking at him. He's had a high K rate, 32% K rate for him, but giving up a ton of power, had a 9% home run rate allowed last year. Does anything seem interesting to you here for San Francisco? It's just such a low run total for them that I feel like Vegas would at least have them over 4 if there was something here to grab onto.
Yeah, so the other issue here is that, well, Morejon is one of the better pitching prospects in baseball. Like, he was pretty well regarded going into last season. But he really functioned as a long reliever or an opener more than anything. He never completed 4 innings in any of his starts last year. So that's a huge red flag for his upside. And I haven't seen anything to make me think that he's all of a sudden going to be a guy who's going to work, 6 innings or anything like that. And then the San Francisco side, I mean, they don't have a great offense. We have them with the 4th lowest odds to be the top scoring team on the slate. So once again, this is a team that they're probably going to be facing Morejon just a couple times through the order. And then they're going to be facing a really strong Padres bullpen. So it's going to be hard to find there to be much upside in San Francisco.
On San Diego's side, you have them facing Anthony DeSclafani, who's been competent, but mostly, mediocre middle tier pitcher, gives up a lot of power to lefties here, 221 ISO to lefties. So guys, to me, Jake Cronenworth hitting in the 2-hole, I think as a value play looks pretty solid for San Diego, assuming that he does get in there. Eric Hosmer, you are paying a very steep price tag for that man, but lefty power going against DeSclafani is always something that I think plays pretty well against him. And DeSclafani last year, for whatever it's worth, in the small sample size of the pandemic season, looked really bad. A 1.7 whip, 5.6 xFIP. These are really down numbers for him over the longer term sample. So maybe expect him to bounce back, but did look pretty bad in that last stretch. So Padres lineup, I feel like top stacks wise, they look a bit overowned, but I still don't hate the idea of getting a taste of them here, especially for, many stacks. And again, Cronenworth to me being the value play that really jumps out meaningfully.
Yeah, so the Padres are a team that I'm probably going to be about even with the field on. They have about 7% projected ownership. That's probably where I am. They'll be, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10% of my lineups as a stack. One of the issue here, though, is that the best players on the Padres are really expensive. So if I'm making an expensive stack, I'm much more apt to go to the Dodgers than the Padres, just based on we have the Padres for about 3x the ownership projected of the Dodgers, while also having about half the odds of being in the optimal lineup. So if I'm paying up, the Dodgers have to be a higher priority than the Padres. I think we have to talk about DeSclafani a little bit, just from a standpoint of there are so many weak SP2 options on the slate. And DeSclafani, we have him projected for about 20% chance to be one of the 2 top scoring pitchers on DraftKings. We also have him projected for 20% ownership. So as an SP2 option, I think DeSclafani is one of the better choices today.
Yeah, I think I would favor our other chalk pitcher of the day, Carlos Rodon, but I could see it going to DeSclafani. I think you're getting a little bit of leverage here on the field, who's going to be taking the Padres at a bit more ownership than they probably should. But yeah, I just hate DeSclafani. He's been one of those dudes for me that I feel like is always, I'm like, he's going to blow up today. And it does happen sometimes, but yeah, I'm with you. And I think too, just looking at the sample size of last year, like he's going to have some positive regression, I think, from that in a weird year for him. And, playing for San Francisco maybe helps him out in a way that I don't know. But either way, yeah, San Diego seems appropriately owned and maybe worth a little exposure. Last game on the slate, we got the White Sox going against Justice Sheffield on their side. The White Sox, I would say nobody jumping out too meaningfully. They do seem to have a better chance of being a top stack relative to their ownership, and they do have some power bats here. So I think you could make a case maybe to play some White Sox, but not the best park, not the best implied run total with 4.3 implied runs for them. I think the White Sox, to me, if they're a team I got an optimizer, I wouldn't be mad. But right now, I don't see a lot that jumps out as being fantastic on paper, with Justice Sheffield really limiting power meaningfully over the longer term sample size, just a 0.099 ISO versus lefties, 0.11 ISO versus righties. It doesn't seem like a spot I'm dying to get to the White Sox, but if I get him, I think I'm not mad. Do you feel any differently, Greg?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little overweight to the field on him just based on we have them as being one of the better leverage stacks and our top stacks tool for the day. 7.5% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate, but only picking up about 4% ownership. So with those numbers, it's probably a team I want to get to in a double-digit percentage of my lineups in terms of a stack. But in the interest of time, I think what we really have to talk about here is Carlos Rodon, just because he is projected for so much ownership. And I mean, if we just look at the projections, like, yeah, he's pretty clearly the second best pitching option on DraftKings behind Jacob deGrom, but nearly 60% ownership for Carlos Rodon. That is crazy high. And I'm apt to get to the Mariners as a stack just to be contrarian and get leverage on the field. Like, they don't even rate out particularly well in our top stacks tool, but Carlos Rodon 60% ownership is just crazy to me. Like, he's going to be in my player pool, but I'm going to be much later on the to him than the field is.
Yeah, and I think, well, I guess who would be the Seattle guys you'd prioritize there? Because I would think I'm still would get a good amount of road on there. Maybe not quite the field 60%, but you do have 6 guys who strike out above league average for Seattle, which I think does give road on a decent runway here. But I think if you look at you guys have Mitch Haniger, I think is a decent play. Kyle Seager, even towards the bottom of the order, you have some really cheap value, which I think might be the way I'm more inclined to go against road on. Guys like Trammell, Moore, Haggerty, Murphy expect to be at the bottom of the order there. But who do you think would be a priority to go against Rodon?
Yeah, so in the Mariner stacks I've built so far, the priority plays have been Murphy at catcher at only 2,500 on DraftKings, and then Haniger at 3,200. Haniger is like a legitimately really good hitter, and that's a much lower price than we saw from him for a lot of the last couple of years. So I just really like the leverage there going up against just a ridiculously popular Carlos Rodon. And by the way, like, I understand why the field is getting to Rodon. He projects well. He's a strikeout pitcher. But at the same time, too, he's been very high variance over the course of his MLB career. And he's probably not any more likely to come out and, suck than he is to light the world on fire. So the two things that are going to really, my slate's going to hinge on is how well Rodon pitches, because I'm probably going to be underweight to the field on him. And then how well the Brewers hit, because they're also coming out as ridiculously popular. And these are two spots I want to be underweight to the field on.
All right, so that covers all of the games on the main slate. Any final thoughts for you, Greg, before we call it quits here? And of course, people should be following at G Ehrenberg DFS, following at Chris Spags, and following at Awesemo_com before they sign off this show today.
I'm going to be back doing MLB Live before lock in a few hours. So then I'll have my lineups more finalized at that point in time. We'll have probably another run of ownership, and then I could really hammer out who I'm actually on as my overall top plays at that point in time.
And I'll be back in a couple hours for the tip-off show, so make sure to watch that. Of course, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and make sure you're subscribe to everything on the podcast network. Go to awesemo.com/podcast. These shows are on there. The NBA strategy shows are on there. Pretty much all the shows besides the Live Before Locks make it on there, so make sure you are going to awesemo.com/podcast. And give things 5 stars and a review with your Twitter handle or email address, because that'll enter you to win a free week of Awesemo Plus over the course of the next year. So you can just keep being entered to win every single week by putting in a review. Yeah, follow at Awesemo_com, follow at G Ehrenberg DFS, follow at Chris Spags. We'll be back with you guys again very soon. Enjoy your days. Good luck.